Revelations in Bolton book rock Senate impeachment trial. Trump lawyers focus on Biden's and second day of arguments. GOP's Romney wants to hear from Bolton, Collins says reports strengthen case for witnesses. Trump calls Bolton allegations false, says he hasn't seen manuscript. As White House lawyers spent their second day defending President Donald Trump at his Senate impeachment trial Monday, questions raised by a reported draft manuscript of a forthcoming book by former National Security Advisor John Bolton gave Democrats new hope in their call for new witnesses to testify. In an unpublished version of Bolton's book The Room, Where It Happened reported by the New York Times on Sunday, Bolton said Trump told him he wanted to continue withholding nearly $400 million in security assistance to Ukraine until officials in Ukraine helped investigate Democrats, including former Vice President Joe Biden. Republican Senator Mitt Romney, one of four GOP moderates Democrats have targeted in hopes of getting their support for witnesses, said Monday it's important senators hear Bolton's account to make an impartial judgment. It's pretty fair to say that John Bolton has a relevant testimony to provide to those of us who are sitting in impartial justice, Romney said. GOP Senator Susan Collins said the reports about Bolton's book strengthen the case for witnesses. Trump denied Bolton's allegation in tweets early Monday morning. 9:02 p.m. Second day of defense team's opening arguments ends. Dershowitz's arguments were largely constitutional and, at times, very scholarly. At one point he read William Blackstone quotes from two very old, large, yellowing books, which were dog-eared with pink sticky notes. He acknowledged that his position on the matter has evolved over time and said that a crime is necessary for a president to be impeached. Impeachable offenses, he said, are treason, bribery are those actions that are similar but perhaps lack certain jurisdictional elements. Abuse of power and obstruction of Congress are not similar crimes, Dershowitz argues. This is the key point in this impeachment case. Please understand what I'm arguing is that purely non-criminal conduct, including abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, are outside the range of impeachable offenses, Dershowitz said. The framers did intend to limit the criteria for impeachment to criminal-like conduct akin to treason, bribery, he added. And they certainly did not intend to extend it to vague and open-ended and non-criminal accusations such as abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. At the close of arguments for the day, Cipollone encouraged senators to consider the golden rule of impeachment. For the Democrats, the golden rule could be, do unto Republicans as you would have them do unto Democrats, Cipollone said. And hopefully we will never be in another position in this country where we have another impeachment, but vice versa for that rule. The defense team's opening arguments will continue on Tuesday. 8:47 p.m. Dershowitz argues Bolton revelations do not rise to the level of an impeachable offense. The Harvard professor emeritus raised the new revelations from Bolton's transcript, as reported on by the New York Times, in his presentation before senators. He argued that the details in the new reporting, even if true, do not rise to the level of an impeachable offense. Nothing in the Bolton revelations, even if true, would rise to the level of an abuse of power or an impeachable offense. That is clear from the history, that is clear from the language of the Constitution, Dershowitz said. You cannot turn conduct that is not impeachable into impeachable conduct simply by using words like quid pro quo and personal benefit. 7:46 p.m. Robert Ray argues charges cheapen impeachment process. Robert Ray argued the charges against Trump cheapened the impeachment process by relying on what he called insufficient evidence and that Trump actions do not rise to the level that they warrant removal from office. The charge must be treason, bribery or other high crimes and misdemeanors. It must be one for which clear and unmistakable proof can be produced. Only if the evidence actually produced against the president is indeed irrefutable such that his own constituents, In this case, the 63 million people like me who voted for President Trump accept his guilt of the offense charged in order to overwhelmingly persuade a supermajority of Americans and thus their senators of malfeasance warranting his removal from office, Ray said. 6:49 p.m. GOP senators praised Trump team going after Biden's. During the dinner break, some Senate Republicans tell reporters they're impressed with this last hour of opening arguments made by the White House legal team, including Eric Hirschman, who continued the attack on Hunter Biden's work on the board of Burisma. Why do they want to pay him millions of dollars? Hirschman asked. Well, he did have one qualification: he was a son of the Vice President of the United States. He was the son of the man in charge of the Ukrainian portfolio for the prior administration, and we are to believe there is nothing to see here. That for anyone to investigate or inquire about this would be a sham. Let's take a step back and realize what actually transpired, because the House managers would have us believe this had nothing at all to do with our government, nothing at all to do with our country's interests, nothing at all to do with our vice president, nothing at all to do with the State Department, Hirschman said. It's simply private citizen Hunter Biden doing his own private business. It was purely coincidental that it was in his father's portfolio in Ukraine in the exact sector, the energy sector, that his father said was corrupt. This afternoon was devastating for the House managers, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas says. We have heard just the beginning of the serious evidence of corruption involving Burisma, Ukrainian natural gas company that paid Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, $1 million a year. There is no evidence of wrongdoing by either of the Bidens. So, I get the press loves to obsess over the latest bombshell, he says, referring to a report about John Bolton's allegations. Listen, I don't know what John Bolton's book says or doesn't say. I've seen the New York Times coverage, but at the end of the day, it doesn't impact the legal issue before the Senate. The legal issue before the Senate is whether the president has the authority to investigate corruption, Cruz says. GOP Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming takes a shot at the presidential hopefuls on the Democratic side, joking that they sat with eyes wide open in shock. Everyone was paying close attention for the discussion about the Bidens, but the four people whose eyes were fully wide open were Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Michael Bennet and Amy Klobuchar, Barrasso says. Ernst, from Iowa, then chimes in with a laugh and a taunt about Iowa caucuses next week. Iowa caucuses, folks. Iowa caucuses are this next Monday evening, and I'm really interested to see how this discussion today informs and influences the Iowa caucus voters, she says. 5:05 p.m. Bondi uses Biden's to claim Trump's concern about Ukraine corruption justified. Hitting on the alleged conflict of interest theme, Bondi uses a video clip of House testimony from Deputy Assistant Secretary of State George Kent in November. I raised my concern that Hunter Biden's status as a board member to create the perception of a conflict of interest, Kent, who oversaw Ukraine policy, says. Questioning Hunter Biden's qualifications to hold a board position, Bondi cites the generous monthly compensation he received as more grounds for suspicion. Bondi turned to Vice President Joe Biden's efforts to force the corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor General Viktor Shokin out of office in exchange for $1 billion in security assistance, alleging that Shokin was investigating the Ukrainian oligarch owner of Burisma at the time. Bondi played a 2016 video clip of Vice President Biden appearing to brag about his ability to use the U.S. aid as leverage to get the Ukrainians to vote Shokin out. I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired, and they put in place someone who was solid at the time, Biden says in the clip. She then suggested that Joe Biden advocated for the Shokin's 2015 dismissal in an effort to protect his son, Hunter. What he didn't say on that video, according to the New York Times, this was the prosecutor investigating Burisma Shokin, Bondi says. What he also didn't say on the video was that his son was being paid significant amounts by the oligarch owner of Burisma to sit on that board. But there is a notable omission. Shokin faced widespread criticism from several high-profile international leaders and anti-corruption advocates in Ukraine who said Biden's recommendation was well justified. The IMF threatened to withhold aid to Kiev in early 2016, citing Ukraine's slow progress in improving governance and fighting corruption, according to Christine Lagarde, the IMF's managing director. And once Shokin was removed, the European Union's envoy to Ukraine, Jan Tombinsky, lauded the decision as an opportunity to make a fresh start. She also doesn't mention that Kent repeatedly denied GOP suggestions that Biden did anything wrong. In fact, Biden was acting in accordance with U.S. policy and in agreement with concerns raised by European governments and anti-corruption advocates in Ukraine. Bondi then, in the context of all these allegations against the Bidens, quotes Trump's request from the transcript of the call with Zelensky. The House managers talked about the Bidens and Burisma 400 times, but they never gave you the full picture, Bondi argues. She attempts to make the request sound fair and reasonable under the circumstances. After laying the narrative out, Bondi says there is enough to make the case that it was fair for Trump to ask Zelensky to look into the matter from an anti-corruption standpoint. You've heard from the House managers, they do not believe that there was any concern to raise here. That all of this was baseless, Bondi says. And all we are saying is that there was a basis to talk about this, to raise this issue, and that is enough, she says. 4:45 p.m. Trump's defense team goes after Biden's at length. Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General and a member of Trump's defense team, brings the argument back to Hunter Biden and the questions from Republicans about whether his role with the Ukrainian natural gas company Burisma was a conflict of interest with his father's position in the Obama administration. It's the first time Trump's defense team has brought up the Bidens at length. Bondi argues that Democrats have made Biden part of the impeachment issue, even though Democrats did so, saying accusations of any wrongdoing are baseless. So have the Bidens. We would prefer not to be discussing this. But the House managers have placed this squarely at issue, so we must address it, Bondi says before reviewing the timeline of Hunter Biden's involvement with the Ukrainian energy company Burisma and news media coverage and questions about the appearance of a conflict of interest when he served on the company's board. Now, the House managers might say without evidence that not everything we just have said has been debunked, that the evidence points entirely and unequivocally in the other direction, she says. That is a distraction. You've heard from the House managers, they do not believe that there was any concern to raise. All of this was baseless, and all we are saying is that there was a basis to talk about this, to raise this issue, and that is enough. Bondi has the chamber riveted, according to ABC News' Devon Dwyer. As she started on the topic of Hunter Biden, Senator Maria Cantrell mouths bull as she turns to Senator Jeanne Shaheen beside her. There are expressions of dismay and concern on several faces of Democratic senators. Senator Cory Booker openly scowls as he stands in the back of the chamber. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer stares dead-on at Bondi with a look of skepticism. Senator Chris Coons, a close ally of former Vice President Joe Biden, aggressively takes notes. Many of the president's Republican allies, Sens. Graham, Barrasso, Braun, Thune, are nodding along. Sens. Romney, Collins, and Murkowski diligently take notes. 4:26 p.m. inside the Senate chamber, Republicans listening intently. During Jane Raskin's presentation focusing on Rudy Giuliani, in which she tried to downplay his role while attempting to distance the White House from Giuliani by telling senators his style may not appeal to them. Senators seemed very engaged, especially Republicans, who intently listened and took notes. GOP Sens. Susan Collins and Mitt Romney are especially engaged, and members of the Trump defense team are noticeably craning their necks during certain portions of the presentation to see how senators are reacting. 3:30 p.m. Raskin, Democrats using Giuliani as a colorful distraction. Rudy Giuliani is the House manager's colorful distraction, another member of the president's legal team, Jane Raskin tells senators in her first turn speaking during the Senate arguments. The House managers would have you believe that Mr. Giuliani is at the center of this controversy. They've anointed him the proxy villain of the tale, the leader of a rogue operation. Their presentations were filled with ad hominem attacks and name-calling, cold-blooded political operative, political bagman. But I suggest to you that he's front and center in their narrative for one reason and one reason alone: to distract from the fact that the evidence does not support their claims, she says. Raskin argues the Democrats' case is based on assumptions around Giuliani's role, including that his motivation was to benefit the president politically, and that the case for impeachment doesn't put his role in context as the president's personal attorney. She says Giuliani has said multiple times that his interest in Ukraine is not related to the 2020 presidential election and predated the announcement of former Vice President Joe Biden's campaign, a big talking point in the Democrats' argument about the timeline of events. Raskin argues Giuliani was a minor player and a shiny object designed to distract senators, and that his work related to Ukraine would be used to defend Trump against allegations that were the focus of former special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, that his campaign colluded with Russian operatives to interfere in the 2016 election. Giuliani, like Trump, has pushed a discredited conspiracy theory that Ukraine, and not Russia, sought to interfere in the election. Events